Buenas tardes a todos. Aquí estamos de vuelta en este lunes. Aquí otra vez con nuestro profesor visitante querido, Mauro Tosco, que nos brindó una charla muy interesante la semana pasada sobre los conceptos de espacio en una comunidad, los Gawadas de Etiopía. Y hoy nos va a hablar de conceptos de colores. Si hay ideas universales de colores hablando específicamente en casos de África. Otra vez, por los que no estaban con nosotros, profesor Mauro Tosco es un profesor de lingüísticas africanos de la Universidad de Turín en Italia. Habla somali y creo que nos va a brindar en otra ocasión una clase o una sesión sobre la cultura y lengua somali. Hizo trabajo de campo en Sudán del Sur recientemente sobre el árabe hablado, digamos, árabe yuba, que resultó en una publicación Juba Arabic, a Less Indigenous Language of South Sudan, con su compañero Stefano Manfredi. Tiene otras publicaciones y me corriges, Mauro, si hago algo de una corrección necesario. También está por publicar un libro coeditado que se llama Contested Languages, y ha publicado algo que se llama A Critical Look at African Latin Orthography. Les recuerdo y los voy a recordar después de la charla que no la siguiente semana o lunes, pero el que sigue, el 7 de noviembre, vamos a tener otra charla de Mauro a las 5, igual en versión virtual, que se llama Borderless Languages in a World of Borders, Examples from Africa and Beyond. So thank you again, Mauro, for being here on a nice Monday afternoon, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Thank everybody. Yeah, you forgot to say that sadly, I'm going to give this talk in English. I cannot, I'm not prepared to give it in Spanish. I'm sorry about it. Siento muchísimo. And well, today's talk, I will do it with, yeah, we better share the screen immediately. So you see, you don't have to see me, and you better see what I'm going to say, if anything. Yeah, it's a little bit like a continuation of what we did last week, that is to see if there are categories that, language categories that impact on thought, and if they are universal, if there are universal linguistic categories. The idea that they can have a relevance on the way we think, it's very important. In a way, it's also dangerous a little bit, because it could mean that not all the human beings think in the same way, and it could have relevance also for our conception of ourselves as a species, as a biological species. And the last week it was about space. It's a favorite of mine, and it's quite a more recent adventure of linguistics into cognitive studies. Today we are going to talk about colors. It's not so recent proposal theory. It's actually a proposal, a theory that was born in anthropology, and from anthropology went into linguistics. As you see from the title, the idea is we don't know if colors are a category, and even if they are a linguistic problem, so to speak. Basically, we are gonna see from a general theoretical point of view the basics of this hypothesis. The hypothesis was proposed, well, you see, in 1969, so it's almost the prehistory. In 1969 in Berkeley, by Brent Berlin and Paul Kay, in a booklet, actually, Basic Color Terms, Universality and Evolution, and there are a lot of following work, but if you are really interested in this, maybe you can try to have a look at a few papers in Clyde Hardin and Louisa Maffei, much later work, 1997, published by Cambridge University Press, Color Categories in Thought and Language, which is of course much more elaborate from a theoretical point of view, and also not so extreme in the proposals. What the theory says is that there are basic color terms in all the languages of human beings, in all the languages of this planet. The number of basic, remember that basic here is written in red, because this is the most important thing in what we're going to say today. There is a limited number of basic color terms, and the emergence, the development of these basic color terms follows a certain hierarchy. That is, they are not random. Let me waste a few minutes of your time, first of all, saying what we are not going to discuss today. We are not going to discuss what the color is, that is the physical colors. First of all, because I don't know anything about it. It's I'm not in medicine. I'm not at all an ophthalmologist and these kind of things. We are not talking about what color is. We are not talking about how we perceive and we see colors actually in our brain, as you know. We know that physical colors is the stimulation of certain cells, usually called cone cells. These cells in the eye, actually in the rear part of the eye, as we're going to see in a moment, is these cells are stimulated by electromagnetic radiation. Light is reflected from the objects on the basis of certain properties. It's reflected as wavelengths. Wavelengths is measured in nanometers. A nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter. The frequency, as for every frequency, is measured in hertz. And we see a great number of colors. It has no meaning to say that we see all the colors, because different species see different colors. They have different eyes, different types of cone cells. Basically, there are different wavelengths for three basic things: red, green, and blue. There are three types of cone cells. We know that bees, birds, and other things can detect ultraviolet light, that is light that is under our lower threshold. There are also animals that have a higher number of photoreceptors, that is a higher number of types of cells. apparently shrimps, a certain variety of shrimps, I don't know why, they have the highest number. Most colors contain a mix of wavelengths. It's very it's very rare that there is a pure color that is one single wavelength. Yeah, we see colors in the rear part of our eye. That is in this part, we have different, okay, here you see that the cone cells as colored, but they are not colored, just to show that they are attuned to receive different wavelengths. Basically, we have rods and cones, and a third type that has been discovered in recent years, that is photosensitive reticular ganglion cells. We have different types of cells because different types of cells are useful, for example, in nighttime and in daytime vision. In daytime vision, we need more brightness, and we can see a higher variety of hues of colors. Okay, let's forget about all this. This becomes more interesting because apparently a normal human eye, I don't know if mine is normal or not, a normal human eye can distinguish up to 10,000 colors. And of course, we don't have names, words, whatever, for 10,000 colors. But let's start asking ourselves an idle question. Do we really need 10,000 words for 10,000 colors? The problem at this point is how can we classify, can we classify the colors that we as humans see? We need certain parameters. Now we have different proposals. As we are going to discuss a theory that was born, remember, in California in 1969, we must use the colors, the color chart that is used in the United States. Basically, it goes back to more than 100 years ago. It was developed by Albert Henry Munsell. If you are in the history of American painting, you maybe know this name. He was a famous, especially famous for his watercolors. You see an example here below. He was also a teacher in Boston at the Normal Arts School, I think it was called. Nowadays, it's called the Boston Arts School. And apart from painting, he was particularly interested in how to classify, how to call, how to divide our vision in terms of color. So he wrote in 1905 an important book for this research, that is A Color Notation, later expanded in the Atlas of the Munsell color system. Let's say that if you live in the United States, as far as I know, also in Mexico, and you go and buy paint for your house or whatever, you are given a chart or different, sometimes they are small plywood blanks in different colors. And in the United States, not in Europe, in Europe we use different systems. But in the United States and part of America, they still use what is normally called the Munsell color system. In the theory that we are going to discuss in a moment is based upon the Munsell color chart. Munsell developed, and this is more or less accepted nowadays, although there is a recent theory by the Germans, which is more complicated, complex, and probably physically correct. But basically, Munsell said that we can classify colors on the basis of three parameters, three values. One is the lightness or tone, that is, let's say, for us, we are not specialists, that is how much bright a color is. That is, physically it corresponds to the quantity of luminosity reflected by an object. that is how much black there is, how much white there is. For example, a light red is said to have to be more luminous, to have more luminosity than a dark red. A second parameter is hue, that is, I don't know how to say it in other languages, actually, is the degree to which a stimulus can be described as similar or different from basic stimuli in red, orange, yellow. It physically correlates with a dominant wavelength. And the third value is saturation or chroma, that is the intensity of a color. And in the end, you can put all of these three parameters in a kind of a column, a three-dimensional column, in which you have the hue, that is the circular point, the luminosity, and the brightness. This is not very useful when you go and you want to buy paint in your supermarket or shop, and that's why you usually receive different plywood charts, or a general chart which more or less provides you with all the possibilities. And this is of course, this is a picture. Actually, this is a PDF of a picture. So again, it's not 100% corresponding to reality. But let's say that on the basis of this chart, you have the colors of Munsell's chart. And this is what the Californians in 1969 and following years did. The theory says that, as already said, yes, we repeat, basic color terms exist in all languages. There is a limited number of them and follows a hierarchy. Maybe we can skip this. This was about language relativity, but we are going to discuss this at the end of this talk, if anything, because it's the general background, also the ideological background of the theory. What are basic color terms? Basic color terms are, again, not what we see, because this is determined by our eye and our luminosity, of course, and our brain, but what we call. The problem was how do we ask what, how do we know from speakers in different languages of the world what are the words for colors? And they developed a number of tests. You will see from reading from this list in this and the next slide that much of these tests are psychological. That is, the first test, and very easy test, is to say or to write as many colors as possible in a short time. I did it myself with my students. And it's very interesting because if you ask different students from the same language community, well, first of all, you discover that the answers are not random. That is, everybody tends to say certain things in the next, in the first, let's say, 10 seconds. Everybody says something like yellow, red, green, blue. It's also interesting, and they didn't know that, and it's not explained. Well, there is no explanation for this, no need for an explanation. I thought at the beginning that somebody was going to start with black and white. Instead, apparently, nobody ever starts with black and white. As far as I know, most of my students, as far as I remember, most of my students start with red or with yellow. There is not a difference in sex or gender. And then they say, as I say, the red, yellow, green, blue. After a few seconds, let's say after 10 seconds, there is a pause. And after this pause, you start having different words. And these words are very different from speaker to speaker within the community and also across communities. Somebody, for example, starts saying golden, silver, and then they say something which you immediately recognize that it's not, well, it's not what we want. Because if somebody says the color of the sky, is describing, is not a word for a kind of color. The second test is a naming test, that is a color mapping. That is, you show to your informants or consultants all of these plywood boards, or if you don't have this color chart, the Munsell color chart, and you ask them to point and to give the name of these things. For example, here, how do you call this? How do you call this? How do you call this? And then you map all these things across your informants. The most informants you have, the best it is. And you discover that again, not all possibilities. That is, the list of colors is not random, and also the borders between this color is not random. There are a few other criteria that, remember that sadly, I am a linguist, and being a linguist, I am interested in certain things, and I prefer this criteria. The first one in this slide, it works very well. Well, it works in English as it works in Spanish very well. That is, basic color terms should be monomorphemic. That is, they must be composed of one unit of meaning. In English, if somebody says yellow, I am happy. If somebody says yellowish, I am not happy, because from the knowledge of the language, we know that yellowish or greenish or dark blue or whatever is not monomorphemic. It's yellow and an affix. Okay, in Spanish, if somebody says rojo, I am happy. If somebody says dark red, light red, and all the derivation that is possible, for example, in many Romance languages, in Spanish, in French, and other languages, I am not happy, because this means that they are derivations from other more basic terms. I don't want to convince you of this theory. First of all, I have lots of problems with this theory, really lots of problems. This is what they say. In my opinion, the whole thing doesn't stand up very much, but this is another point. We're going to discuss it at the end of the talk. A second important thing is that the meaning is not included in that of other color terms. We are always talking about what a basic color term is. Remember this. That is, if somebody says yellowish, it does not count as a basic color term, because yellowish, any speaker of English knows that yellowish is a variety of yellow. Red is not a variety of yellow. Green is not a variety of yellow. Yellowish is a variety of yellow. Rouge in French is rojo. Rougeâtre is a variety of red, and this kind of thing. The last probably criterion, and it's interesting, is that I want to have words, in order for these color terms to be basic, words of general application, that is, words that are not restricted to specific class of objects. What do I mean? I mean that yellow is okay, again, because in principle it can be applied to anything, animate or non-animated, that has a certain reflex, etc., from a physical point of view. Think about blonde. Blonde is not a basic color term, because blonde, I don't know exactly, I'm not a native English speaker, but as far as I know, blonde can be applied to humans, to the hair of humans, a blonde woman, a blonde girl, a blonde man, and so on. And as far as I know, it can be applied to types of beer. Yeah, right? There are, at least in French and Italian, there are blonde beers that are light beers. But apart from beers and human beings and the hair of human beings, I cannot say of a yellow tree, I cannot say that is blonde. Of a yellow cover of this book, the book I have in front of me at this time, you can't see it. I cannot say that it's a blonde book. The last point is that they are psychological studies. Psychological studies is what we saw before. That is, they come early when I ask people to give me in a rush the color they want, and they are more or less stable. That is, nobody who is not sick has a problem in pinpointing what a red is or a green is. They can have problems in saying, up to this point, it's dark or light or normal, because all these categories are not basic color terms. Of course, we have to exclude whatever we find, well, when we go and buy in shops. And for example, we find, I don't know, for example, my computer bag has a certain color, which is kind of a dark red. I don't really know. Maybe you can see it. No, you can't. I don't really know the name of this color. Maybe it's burgundy red, whatever it means. Okay, of course, burgundy red is not a basic color term. And petroleum green, I don't know if you use it, petroleum, we say petroleum, verde petrolio in Italian, is kind of a dark and let's say, it's very dark green. And of course, it's petroleum, it comes from petroleum, so it's not a basic color term. Do you think that you know now what a basic color term is? If you do, we can say what the theory, remember 1969, said. All languages have at least two colors, white and black. A maximum of 11 basic color terms is attested. And the system grows in a fixed way along different stages. I know that you do not agree. I know that you have many problems. I have too, but bear with me a moment. That is, this is not the original chart in Burn Case book. This is something I did. That is, in stage 1, you have just white and black. In stage 2, you also add red. In stage 3, you can choose. Some languages add green, some languages add yellow. And whatever you do in stage 3, in stage 4, you do the reverse. That is, if you chose green in stage 3, now you choose yellow. If you chose yellow in stage 3, in stage 4, you choose green. This is stage 4. In stage 5, you add the blue, and then you add the brown, and then you add many other colors. This is the original scheme. I find it less clear, less useful than mine. That is white and black, then you add red, then you add either green and yellow, and then yellow or green, then blue, then brown, and then you have others. You could say, okay, but what is the evidence for all this? What is the evidence for certain languages not having other colors than white and black, or certain languages not having the blue? And what do you do if you don't have the blue? Okay, the 1969 sample was done in Berkeley, California. Was done with speakers of different language available in the campus at the University of California. So therefore they were all bilingual in English, and sometimes they were speakers of different language of the US or other parts of the world. The sample was very limited. It was just 20 languages. This is ridiculous. You cannot do a theory on anything on the basis of 20 languages, because we know that in the world there are, well, nowadays we say almost 7,000 languages. It was also uncontrolled. Uncontrolled means that it was not statistically significant because there were too many, let's say, European languages, and no language from Aboriginal Australia. Well, simply because there were no Aboriginals at the campus in University of California, Berkeley. So this alone is enough to say that all this is simply nothing. Although we know, and it's in brackets in the second point here, that it's very difficult to have a statistically significant sample of language, but this is another problem. There were a limited number of informants, a maximum 3 for language, because again, there were bilinguals. It was done in Berkeley, and it was very early. A few years later, they got a lot of money. They got a lot of money from the National Science Foundation in the US. And they started traveling around the world, doing work with as many languages as possible, but not so many, 110. And doing work in the place where the language is spoken. This can be quite interesting and quite give you different results. According to them, according to these guys from California and the associates, they didn't change very much, but in a moment. There were also linguistic problems. For example, there are, well, they didn't know how to explain the fact that gray, which is not, as you remember, in the basic color term, appeared quite early, so it was already an exception. It was an exception in 2 languages, Utah-Staten languages of the US, of the Southwest. So they had gray, but there was no blue. And maybe it's also a problem that among these linguistic terms here, white, black, red, green, yellow, it looks like there are primary colors and secondary colors. I mean, orange for me is not a primary color. Purple typically is not a primary. Okay, they modified the scheme. It became a bit more, let's say, sensible, but also a bit less predictive. And they say that gray can appear, it's kind of a jolly, that is, it can appear in any place, in any moment in the scheme after you have red. So there could be languages of white, black, red, and then there is gray, in order to account for a lot of exceptions. I can maybe skip this, but they say that actually there are a few languages in which there are just 2 basic color terms. One actually, one in Papua New Guinea, in which there are just 2 terms, mili and mola. There are a few languages, for example, there is Ejagam in Nigeria, so in Africa, which has white, kind of a red-yellow, and then black, green, blue. Please remember that I am talking about basic color terms. Of course, I am not saying that these people are not able to see or to speak of green, blue, black, and petroleum green, everybody can do, but what they do with basic color terms. So we have a stage 3 language in Brazil, and so on and so forth. What do you find in Africa? Not much, and I talk about this topic also because I did some research. Well, I'm not an associate of this group of people. By the way, the research now is finished. I was not an associate of these people. I didn't have the money and the equipment and all the workers in order to do a very serious work. But I tried to do my best, and I give you my results from a language of Ethiopia, and then a couple of results from other 2 languages of Africa, which were investigated by the people themselves. The language we are going to discuss about very briefly, 5 minutes, is called the Lasnich. If you remember what we were discussing last week, it was Gawad. Gawad is spoken here, and it's more or less on the mountain that is 1,500 meters high. This is a completely different environment, completely different society, ecology, social structure, whatever you want. We are more or less in a very flat and for most part of the year desertic plain, very barren. This picture was done, was taken by me in a period after some rain, so you see some green pastures behind this girl. But keep in mind the ecology and the place where the language is spoken. It's spoken exactly at the border between Ethiopia, a majority of the speakers are in Ethiopia, and a few speakers are in Kenya, where the Omo River flows into the Turkana Lake. From the point of view of people who live in the mountains, these are very horrible places, believe me. Hot, dry, with not enough water and with a lot of limitations in, well, what all this has to do with color? Maybe it has to do with what color you see in your everyday life. And so maybe this has a bearing on what basic color terms you use and you have in your language. I did not have hundreds of plywood boards, a few centimeters wide each, because I was traveling with a backpack and I couldn't carry with me 20 kilos of plywood color boards. So I used a few pictures of the general Munsell chart, and I showed them. I actually distributed them to my informants, and I asked them to pinpoint to how they code these different parts of the Munsell color chart. Second, I am and I was a linguist, and I was particularly interested in the linguistic correlates of these words, and I discovered something interesting, something actually that I didn't want to, but actually something that could help the theory. Okay, so this is one of the results, that is a photocopy of what I got. That is, everybody agreed that this part is on-or is black. Everybody agreed that all this is green. Remember, also this is green. Everybody more or less agreed that this is yellow, white, green, and so on. There are also a few non-basic color terms, because it was a pity not to get the non-basic color terms when I was at it. So I got Corbich, which means purple, Icar, which means light gray, kerch, which means beige, but everybody said, okay, these are parts, sections, subsets of the basic color tones. Interesting. These people do not have a word for blue. In order to say blue, you say Gilieb, but Gilieb means green. Marle. Marle actually is a neighboring people. They didn't know why they call blue the green of the Marle. By the way, they do not agree very much with the Marle, and from time to time they kill each other. But anyhow, the blue is called the green of the Marle, probably because in the past they bought something which is more or less green, blue colored from the Marle. The Marle don't live very far away. At first sight, it was quite shocking to me, but then I reflected and okay, now here you are all speakers of Spanish. And in Spanish, it doesn't work. But you can remember that I interrupted my screen sharing, I guess. Well, you know maybe some French or some Italian. I'm talking about Romance languages of Europe. And in Italian, in order to say blue, or in French, in order to say blue, you say bleu or blue. Bleu in French, bleu in my native language, spoken between France and Italy in a way, blue in Italian, which means that we do not have a native word for blue. In Spanish you have azul. In Italian there is azzurro. For a few speakers, maybe azzurro is the same thing as blue. To me and to most speakers, especially in the north and center of the country, it is not. Azzurro is not basic at all. It's something that I learned in school. I learned in school precisely because I did not know how to write blue. There is no way to write blue in Italian. And of course, blue, everybody, any speaker of Italian knows that is not an Italian word. It doesn't change for gender. You cannot say blua or this kind of thing. It's just one syllable. It doesn't look or sound like an Italian word. And actually, it's not. Blue was first attested in Italian in the, I think, 16th or 17th century. In written Italian, it comes from the north. It came from France. And in France, again, it came from the north. Blue is a Germanic word. It's the same word found in English, in Dutch, in German. So it means that our means, in this case, the ancestors of Italian speakers, French speakers, and so on, simply did not or could not remember exactly a word for blue. What did they do? I do not know. I do not know. Frankly, I do not remember the word for blue in Latin, if ever I knew. The basic color system of Latin was completely different, by the way, to the color system of the modern languages. They had two whites, for example, not one. This can help you understanding that maybe it's not so strange that you do not find a basic color term for blue. And actually, what I found out for Dasenech, that is, Dasenech is a stage for language. There is a white, there is a black, there is a red, there is yellow, there is something which is green and blue. sometimes these people write about GRU as a general category. And then there are many others non-basic color terms. It was interesting then to compare what happens with in Dassanage, what happens in different parts of Africa, that is in South Africa. And we're going to see it in a moment with data from Malawi and South Africa and Zimbabwe. And it's exactly the same. There is no word, basic, remember, basic color term for blue. There is the presence of gray and brown, but the absence of blue is quite widespread in Africa. Sorry, I do not have a general map of Africa, and I do not have the data for the 2000 languages of Africa, but certainly it's quite common. There are a few other things interesting. You see here that the research was done in, not by me, was done in Chichewa. Chichewa is spoken in Malawi, was done in Setswana and Xhosa, and they are spoken in South Africa. Plus, they have a few other interesting things, that is, sometimes brown is problematic. Yeah, brown is problematic. I have to skip all this because we don't have time. But let's say the interesting thing was that the basic color terms behave in Dassanage in a special way. They are a special form of words. They have a certain morphology which is not shared by the other colors. That is also linguistically, strictly linguistically, they are different from the non-basic color terms, with the exception of black. I don't know why, probably black is a loanword from another language, and black does not work, but white, red, yellow, and green, blue, they behave in the same way in terms of feminine, masculine, plural, verbs, all this kind of interesting thing that we linguists are interested in, and you are not, and it's fine. I skip all this. In Chichewa, there is the same thing, that is, there is not a word for green, for blue. They say chobiriwa. Chobiriwa is green and blue together. For brown, the informants, and remember that these guys are the Californian guys, they had lots of money, lots of informants, a lot of time, and they interviewed tens of different informants, different sex, different location in town and the countryside, different age, different level of literacy, and so on and so forth, which is not the case of what I did in Ethiopia. Okay. In order to say brown, the most common word is chakofi. But coffee derives from coffee. And this is something that we can discuss. That is, if it derives from coffee, it's not a basic color term according to the theory. On the other hand, if they use it, chakofi, for everything, not just for talking about coffee, but for talking about, I don't know, the skin of people or the color of trees, well, maybe it has at least one of the various criteria of basicness. So we discover one thing that I suspected very early, that is the different criteria used in the theory sometimes conflict. And there is not agreement, and they chose probably certain things because it was good for the theory. Let's talking about, okay, for example, for gray, they have Chapulsa, which is Bantu, but then many young speakers tend to say Chagre. And gray derives from gray because they are literate in English, young speakers. So what will happen? Will gray becomes just as blue in Italian and French, a new basic color term? How did people describe the color of of blue before knowing maybe the blue color from English. Well, they say chamtambo, but chamtambo actually means sky. And this is exactly the same thing they told me. Let me go back to Ethiopia, the Gawada. The Gawada, when they speak about the blue, they do not have, again, I don't show you the map of Gawada here, they don't have a specific word for blue, and they say the green of the sky. So this pattern actually repeats itself apparently in Africa and well beyond Africa, in all parts of the world, even in Europe. Then we had data from Ndebele, which is spoken in Zimbabwe and South Africa. And there is, again, there is the same thing, that is, there is no term for blue, there is a green-blue together. The end of the story is not according to me, but according to many critics. Is this a theory about how the language name colors, or it's simply a description of how poor speakers from all over the world translate the Mussel chart? That is this really something that belongs to the language, or is simply a way to translate in a way the terms of English? I'm going to tell you the most important criticism in a moment, but I realized at the end of the story, and many linguists at least agree, that maybe there is something in the theory, but, and we can discuss this, is color all that important? I mean, is color really all that important when we talk, when we speak? Do we really use color a lot when we, different terms of colors a lot when we talk in our language, in our human, natural languages, apart than when we are painters, when we are artists, when we sell paint. But all the other people, do we really talk about color a lot? And is color such a central category in language? I don't know, to be a male or female, whatever your idea about gender, it seems to be a central point, because many languages have affixes. Think about Spanish. To be big or to be small, it's central. Think about the difference between pequeño, pequeñito, and so on and so forth. Difference in time, present, future, is important in many languages. But I don't know of any languages that has different affixes in order to say, I don't know, a green book and a red book. You don't use two different affixes. You use two different words if you really want to speak about two different covers of books. That is, sometimes color is not so important. And then there is another thing that we can discuss, and you as anthropologists can correct me in case. I was thinking, think again about what we discovered, I discovered because I was ignorant, but it was well known that blue is a Germanic loan in our languages. And probably our, I am from the northwest of Italy, probably also my grandfathers and great-grandfathers used bleu. But a few centuries ago, we didn't say blue, we didn't say anything. What did we do? Okay, I have no idea, but think about I don't know, something else. Do you know what fuchsia is? Do you know the color fuchsia? Hello?
Well, in English, you pronounce it fuchsia.
Oh, sorry. Okay, fuchsia. We say fuchsia because we got it from, okay, of course, from written English. And so you know what it is?
Yes.
More or less. I don't ask you to describe it because I don't know how to describe it, okay? I really don't know how to describe it. And do you, is it used, the word, whatever it's pronounced in Mexico, in Spanish nowadays? Probably, yes. I don't know, I didn't hear it here in Mexico, but probably it is used. My question is, what did people do before importing from the United States something that is fuchsia or fuchsia? What did my grandmother do? Well, probably nothing, because she never saw anything that is fuchsia. How many things in the world there are that are fuchsia? And even more, how many natural things there are fuchsia? I mean, if you live in this environment of the girl here, how many do you ever see violet in your life? Do you ever really see fuchsia? Do you really see all the different hues of black, or sorry, of green or blue or whatever that we see when we go and buy our clothing in shops here? Probably not. Well, see that the girl has a very nice headband with color beads. These sometimes are there are different colors, different price, and yes, these are color. They are not, of course, done there, they are imported. But apart from that, well, there are probably not many colors in in this natural environment, but I would say in most natural environments, they are different. If you live in Siberia, it's different than if you live in Ethiopia or in Papua New Guinea, but you live in a certain environment. And how many different colors do you see in life? And most of all, how many different basic words do you need for living and for describing the things? So the final blow, and I have to skip here because there will be very many other interesting things about other. We can end with this slide. The final blow to the theory, in my opinion, is a very trivial observation. Okay, the theory said that you can start with 2 basic color terms, and remember, the maximum is 11. And why it is 11? Well, English apparently has 11 color terms, basic color terms. That is, the end of the story is that probably, and this is written here, any language comes to look similar in its treatment of color, and our system, that is our Western European or whatever system, is the most complex. And many things are not considered by Munsell, poor guy, or by our researchers, our anthropologists and linguists. For example, many languages have different words if a certain plant is ripe or not, and ripeness is much more important than color, of course. And you can have different words for different types of ground, which can be wet or dry, and different quantity of dryness. And this is much more important. And then, of course, you use metaphors if you want really to describe a certain strange colors. For example, you can say the blue of the sky, the blue of my enemies, the blue of petroleum, and so on and so forth, if you know petroleum. There are very different, we have to skip this because we do not have time. Basically, everything boils down to a reconsideration of a very important theory, which was more or less discussed in the 30s by Benjamin Worf and Sapir, and is often called the Sapir-Worf hypothesis. That is, they said different languages impact their speakers with different ways of thinking, and therefore our thought is not so is really we have different ways of thinking depending on our language. This is not true. All these hypotheses, this basic color term hypothesis, which remember was done in the 60s, 70s, 80s, is a reaction against this extreme relativistic hypothesis. And it campaigned for an extreme universal hypothesis. That is, all the languages have terms for colors, all the languages have the same, etc., and so on and so forth. Well, probably, I don't know, many linguists, many cognitivists, and as far as I know, also a few anthropologists now think that there is evidence for kind of a weak Worfian hypothesis that is certain language-specific categories are being learned, they are routinized, they become conventionalized, and they become increasingly habitual and automatic, and therefore they may impact thought. But for the most part, we do not believe in these extreme relativistic ideas. Okay, the end of the story is that, in my opinion, let me go back to the basic tenet of this theory. This one, this basic hypothesis of the basic color term is very weak because it's not based upon a good sample of language, and it's not based upon a real analysis of the language and cultures. It is more or less an application of what, in this case, American English-speaking speakers do with color, and trying to translate their color terms into different languages. Of course, if I show anybody, I mean, I did it with DASNet, you can do it with any language in the world, the Munsell color chart, I come up with something, because everybody can talk about everything. But am I sure that I discovered the category, let's stress the word category, of color in this language? I am not sure. I think that this theory is basically a theory in order to explain how you translate English into different languages. It has nothing to do with different cultures, or very little to do with different languages, different cultures, and so probably is not so interesting for us. Whatever, here I end my talk, and now we have, this time maybe we have some more time for discussion and criticism and whatever. Blue in Latin, Satomi Miura writes, blue in Latin is ceruleum. Ceruleum, I think it has to do with not with the sky. It has to do, the etymology is the etymology of ash. It's probably the etymology of ash. There is, for example, a war. It's interesting. Thank you, Satomi, because thank you, Miura. Sorry, because there is a very difficult learned word for something in Italian. I don't know in Spanish. That is ceruleo. It's almost the same as in Latin. Ceruleo, I think, is kind of a very pale blue, don't ask me more, because I never said this word in my language. I read it in poetry. And this is typical of many words of this type. I mean, how many different words we know, but we don't really use it. Ceruleum is one of those, for example. Yes, thank you. And for white, there was, in Latin, there was, a bright white, and there was pale white, while we do not make these distinctions anymore. Okay, whatever. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mauro.
Questions?
Does anyone have a question for Mauro, whether on Facebook or through Zoom? Looks like Aaron has his hand raised. So go ahead.
Thank you.
Hi, Mauro. Thanks for that presentation. It was fascinating. Some of the things that you mentioned about Chichewa started me thinking. I mean, the whole problem of discussing a language like Chewa in the present after the reign of Banda in Malawi, in the way that English itself was celebrated as this apogee of intellectual everything for decades, right? And when you were mentioning the fact that gray for younger people may be something which is integrated into their daily speech and therefore becomes a part of the language, and I couldn't help but start thinking about the whole problematics of treating Chewa like some sort of locus of authentic language, because I mean, there are people who were born and grew up under Banda and under his language policies, and I don't know if they ever necessarily, from the first day they started going to primary school, spoke pure Chewa, or if they would even know what that is, or if it's even an important term for them.
Yeah.
So I don't know how those historical elements impact on the whole sort of ethnographic, anthropological vision of language as being some authentic signifier in that sense.
Yeah, I completely agree, but but think, without going to Chichewa, think simply about Berkeley, California. Remember that these people did the research at campus, and they interviewed probably students, maybe PhD students, coming from Arizona, New Mexico, and speaking, I don't know, in one case it was Hopi, in another case it was Papago. Papago was spoken instead now in Southern California. How much of the original language they knew? I don't know, I don't have the data. How much they spoke English? Probably, being American PhD students, they spoke better English than Navajo. How much, and then they were at the campus, and being in a campus means certain things that, I mean, you think in English, you do not think the same as you when you are in the reservation. So in the case of Chichewa, when you do part of your research in a school, by the way, they did it in a high school, where in Malawi, as in most African countries, the high school is done in English or French. This certainly impacts a lot of the results. What is strange to me is not this. What is strange is that these people do not care. I mean, how can you travel all around the world, publish a paper about Chichewa, by the way, in one of the most prestigious linguistic journals, and another one about the basic color terms of Ndebele and Xhosa and so forth, without or just maybe mentioning, I am being too strict, but sometimes they mention these problems in a footnote. But in my opinion, and probably also in your opinion, it's much more than a footnote. I mean, it changes completely the picture, and they do not care. And this is in my opinion, is really a scandal. I mean, they shouldn't do this kind of I'm looking for this, yeah. Yes, there were 20 languages, and the languages that were available at Berkeley, California at that time. And by the way, there were 3 or 4 American Indian languages, but maybe there was 1 African language, but you know, it's not representative. And most of all, as you say, it's not representative of the societies. Yes, yes, yeah. But then imagine, it's quite funny sometimes. I mean, they went into the jungle in the Philippines with the plywood carts, and they showed the people these different Munsell cards. And of course, they wanted the translation of the Munsell color cards in the language of those people, while all around them there were hundreds of different hues of green, because they were in a jungle, but they were not interested in this. They were interested in the translation of the Munsell color chart. That's it. I mean, it's strange, but sometimes people do these things. At least the research done in the 90s by the people of Nimega about space and color, about space, that I described last week, was a bit more, let's say, a bit more serious in its cultural consciousness. This one is not very much.
Thanks, Mauro.
Yeah, it is not very much, and there is some comment. There is some. I studied the Nayeri language of northern Mexico, and they've shown a fascination for phosphorescent or bright. I'm reading from the chat, and they have shown a fascination for phosphorescent or bright colors. You have found in your studies on phosphorescent color, they say in Spanish, colores subidos. I didn't know colores subidos. And no, actually, I did not, no, I don't have anything about phosphorescent colors. Of course, think about the girl in my picture of Dasenech country, and she had very bright red, blue beads, plastic beads, bought in the market. And I could ask, how do you say this particular color? And people, okay, and she did the same thing as everybody does in the world. If I really want to say this particular red because I like this red, I say the red of, I don't know, and you make a metaphor. So, and that's the end of the story. You don't need a basic color term. There are also, I couldn't mention it, but if you are interested in culture and how culture expresses colors, some anthropologists did some serious work again in Ethiopia, just north of Dasenech. They did a very much better than my study, and they were asking the Mursi are an Nilotic people north of the Dasenech about certain colors, and they simply could not get anything because the informants refused to talk about, about blue. And they said, sorry, but we do not have blue cows. because they care about cows. All the life is centered around cows, just like the Dawson Edge. So they say, I don't know, the informants say something like, well, we don't know about you in America, but we here, we do not have blue cows, which is typical. Of course, I did not discuss all the specific color terms that all these people have for specific semantic fields. Think about, but we also have them in Spanish, thinks about all the different heights of cows, of horses. You have different words according to the type of height, of colors of cows, horses, sheep, goats, etc. I don't know many of these words in Spanish, English, Italian, or whatever, because I do not deal with these things. But of course, there is a fascinating and very rich field of study. Well, it's not what they wanted to do. They wanted to discover the universal of color, the universals in the plural of color. And the question is, did they discover such universals or not? In my opinion, not, or very little. And certainly phosphorescent colors, they cannot claim that, nobody can claim that they are basic color terms, yes. But I do not have other data, sorry. I do not see other comments in chat. And I do not have Facebook, so I do not see if there are other things on Facebook. Oh, yes, there is Andrew. Yep. Hi.
Thanks a lot for your time. I have a couple of questions and one comment. I'll say the comment first. I was, when the question of blue in Latin came up, I, like Satomi, went and looked. And I found that it actually, at least in the dictionary that I looked in, the etymology is from sky. It's from caelum, which according to the dictionary means the vault of the sky, which I thought was interesting because it's not just sky.
Sorry, it's a Germanic word or Proto-Indo-European?
Proto-Indo-European.
Proto-Indo-European. Okay.
So it's interesting that it's, in that case, it's sort of an elusive term. What was fundamental about the sky is not its blueness, or vice versa, it was the shape. And so it's sort of an incidental color term in a way. But this leads into the question that I want to ask, which is that one of the things that you noted is that color terms can come from a variety of sources. So it might be a plant, which I think is the case with fuchsia. There's a plant that's that color.
Yes.
Or it can come from a commodity.
Or a flower, something like that, yes.
It's a flower, yeah.
A flower,
and
yeah, that's what I remember reading, yeah.
In Spanish, they do say fucsia as well. Anyway, so the color term can come from a number of different things. And I'm wondering if there's any way to explain or predict which thing comes to provide the color. Because presumably, say if you live in the ocean, but you're also in a trading community, if you have access to lapis lazuli and to the ocean, either one of those things might come to be the thing that stands in for blue. So how, in an environment where there are a plurality of colors, what is there any way to know why the thing that came to provide the color term actually did come to provide the color term?
Yeah, thank you. Many ideas to your question. There is many ideas in my mind. My idea, but it's just a gut. If I have to choose between, I do not have the word for blue, and I have to choose between ocean and the lapis lazuli. I don't know how to pronounce this word in English, by the way. I would choose lapis lazuli. Because the ocean, I see it every day. By the way, it's not such a, I mean, is it really all jet blue apart from postcards? While lapis lazuli is, well, it may have an economic value. It certainly has an aesthetic value. I mean, it's interesting. But there is another possibility. I am a bit pervert maybe in this idea. Think about Ciceo again saying coffee for brown. And we know that coffee comes from English. Of course, coffee is not an English word, but whatever. It arrived there through English, so it's an English loan. Now imagine that everybody used this word for brown, and in 100 years, they discovered, the World Health Organization discovered that coffee is much more dangerous than tobacco, and it's forbidden, and nobody drinks coffee anymore, and the word for coffee, meaning coffee, disappears. But brown is still called coffee. In this case, well, of course, it has become a particular term. But in 1,000 years, do I still know that originally it was coffee? No, probably not. Just as the normal English speaker doesn't know that blue derives from a word spoken thousands of years before in somewhere, someplace by somebody. This is one of the yes. I don't know. I found when I just played with my students with these things, I found fascinating the fact that, well, my students were more or less girls, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. So, okay. But I found it interesting that everybody more or less said the same color in Italian. Everybody stopped after let's say 8-9 seconds, stopped for a few seconds, and then they started trying to think something new and not knowing exactly what to come up with. And even the order in which they gave me the colors was very similar. I don't know if this proves anything, probably not. But certainly if you try this in different languages belonging to the same culture, yes, different European, or probably it proves something. I don't know. Certainly many loans are bound to come up in the vast majority of languages. I mean, just as in Ciceo and just as in, not in Dasanec, because in Ethiopia they do not have until now so much English interference, but I mean, in Somalia, I remember that somebody used giallo, meaning yellow in Italian, and they used giallo speaking in Somali. So, you know, yeah. There are very fascinating topics in all this, and just as we discovered for space, probably also with time, and also with the shape, that is how we react to shape and to material. Apparently different languages react in different ways, different cultures. Sorry. Didn't know about blue coming from a word from sky, but certainly it's one, yeah, think about it. There are not many blue things in a natural environment. I mean, the ground is not blue. Water, when you don't have much water, is not blue. You don't have many blue flowers except in certain very lucky environments. Certainly you don't find blue flowers in southern Ethiopia. So if you really want to speak about the color of the sky, you say the color of the sky. But my basic question is, but do we really need to talk about the color of the sky? Yeah. If you are not a poet, why should you sky? I mean, yeah, there is a question, but another question by Aaron, I think. No, or maybe it's still the same. Okay.
Oh, no. Actually, I just had a quick comment. I was actually working sort of to see whether I would mention when you talked about the Chewa word for brown coffee. It's interesting when you talked about the possible implications or changes that might happen to that word, and I couldn't help but think in Swahili actually there are two words for brown, and one of them is kahawa, which comes from Arabic, and the other one is yaudongo, which comes from dirt. And I don't know. I mean, I couldn't help but think about when you were talking primary color terms. They're not actually a primary color, because of course
they're not basic. Yeah, but in this case, the California guys would be happy because they say, you see, brown is not basic in Swahili exactly because they do not have a term for blue or whatever.
Right.
So brown is already a bit down the hierarchy. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I interrupted, but also again the word for coffee in the form bunna, which comes from Ethiopic, is used in many languages, also in Arabic, in order to say brown in spoken Arabic. Yeah, because coffee is, well, actually, I mean, economically. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah.
No, it just seems to me it's an extremely complicated idea all around. I mean, it's not surprising that there's limitations to the theory, to put it gently. Just because, I mean, I don't know if there's been studies done to determine where is the word Rangia Kahawa used and where is the word Rangia Odongo used. I would imagine that it's probably the case that in the north, it's not used because the ground is not actually brown. It's more reddish in color.
Right.
But I don't know. I wouldn't know for sure.
And of course, the ground has different colors in different times of the year, and according to how much water it contains, blah blah blah. And but I also just got another opinion. Yes, but if you want to read, but it's a bit technical and maybe not so interesting, but in the book I mentioned by Hardin and Muffy, there is one of the last chapters is written by Lucy. Lucy is a family name by probably one of the most important scholars in actually Uto-Aztecan languages of Mexico. He's one of the guys from the United States who did much work all his life. He's very old now, in this part of the world. And he destroys the theory. But being a native speaker of English, he shows, but listen, guys, even in English, the colors do not behave in the same way from a linguistic point of view. For example, you can have redder, you can have greener, you cannot have, as far as I know, but please correct me, you cannot have yellower. I don't know if yellower is correct. You can have whiter. Yes, there was a whiter shade of pale many years ago. Then there are differences in the derivation. You can have the verb to whiten, to blacken, to redden, but you cannot have the verb to yellowen, meaning to paint yellow. So even in English, colors do not behave like a single linguistic category. They behave to different things, just as in Italian, just as in Chichewa. But mostly his criticism, being an anthropological linguist, is mainly based upon upon the semantics, the fact that probably there are basic color terms in any language, but they are not according to the same dimensions of the Mussel color chart. maybe somebody has two basic color terms for yellow according to the different types of water that is contained in the leaves. I don't know, I'm just inventing. Think about the different colors of corn or maize in different stages of ripeness. And probably they are basic in that culture, but this is not what they want. Yeah, sorry. Again, what I wanted to show today is possible venues of collaboration between different fields, that is linguistics and, well, anthropology and psychology sometimes. And not to mention the impact, as you said, of language policies and education and this kind of things that is, they are catastrophic sometimes. For language minorities, I mean. Yeah.
Any further questions for Mauro?
I'm just looking around. I am in Emily's studio and office, and I'm looking around at all the covers of the box here, and of course, they're different colors. And then I think, yes, but how many of these colors are in a way natural colors? Very few of them, of course, because nowadays, of course, we can create very nice, very beautiful covers, like everything, of so many different colors that we do not, that our ancestors did not have. And for example, our ancestors, I don't know, it was the Greeks or the Latins who, in order to talk about a certain type of red, spoke about the red obtained by certain worms that were actually ground in order to obtain a dye, in order to color things. But nowadays we have so many colors, and we live in a world of colors. Yeah, we live in a world of colors. And I'm not sure that this is the case for most of the world, most of Africa, and also for our ancestors. Thank you again.
Well, thank you, Mauro, and thank you everyone for attending. Just a reminder that his next talk will be November 7th at 5 p.m. On borderless.
November 7, you said.
Mm-hmm.
November 7, yes.
Yeah.
I didn't hear.
So not next Monday, but the following one. And the talk will be about borderless languages in a world of borders, examples from Africa and beyond. So hope to see you all then, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, everybody. Sorry for keeping you so late. Thank you, everybody. Bye. Hasta luego.
Thanks, Mauro. Bye.
Hasta luego. Ciao. Thank you.